In the serene town of Ridgewood, nestled among the rolling hills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, life seemed idyllic. The town's slow pace, friendly community, and breathtaking landscapes made it a haven for those seeking peace. However, this peaceful facade was shattered one fateful winter morning when the body of a prominent community figure, Judge Harold Grant, was discovered in an abandoned hunting cabin. The brutal murder sent shockwaves through Ridgewood, leaving residents fearful and bewildered. Judge Grant was not just a respected member of Ridgewood's legal system, but a symbol of stability and order. His untimely and violent death left the community reeling, but as investigators delved deeper into the case, they uncovered a story more chilling than anyone could have imagined. Beneath the judge's polished exterior lay a dangerous secret, a consuming obsession with a much younger woman, Elise Carter, the 24-year-old daughter of Ridgewood's long-serving sheriff, Richard Carter. What began as an illicit affair quickly spiraled into a web of manipulation, possessiveness, and ultimately murder. The investigation unearthed a twisted chain of events that blurred the lines between victim and perpetrator, forcing Ridgewood to confront a side of its community it had never seen before. Harold Grant had long been regarded as a pillar of authority in Ridgewood. At 52, he had presided over countless trials in the county courthouse, earning the respect of colleagues and townsfolk alike. Yet, behind his stern exterior, Harold was a man struggling with personal demons. 2 years prior, his marriage of 25 years had ended in a bitter divorce. His ex-wife, Emily, cited his long hours and emotional distance as the primary reasons for their separation. Their 2 children had moved out of Ridgewood, leaving Harold to wrestle with his newfound solitude. For Harold, the courthouse had become both his refuge and his prison. The long days helped him suppress the gnawing loneliness that crept in during the quiet hours at home. His once proud career now felt hollow, the weight of his title offering little comfort in the absence of a family to share it with. It was during this time of vulnerability that Harold first encountered Elise Carter. The meeting occurred at a gala hosted by Ridgewood's Cultural Arts Council, where Elise was volunteering as an event coordinator. Harold, attending as a guest of honor, found himself drawn to the young woman's vivacious energy and quiet confidence. Elise was unlike anyone he had encountered in years, a refreshing contrast to the rigid formality of his daily life. Elise, on the other hand, was eager to escape the confines of Ridgewood. As the daughter of Sheriff Carter, she had grown up under the shadow of authority and discipline. Though she admired her father's dedication to law enforcement, she often felt stifled by his expectations and the small-town environment. Working at the local art gallery and volunteering for cultural events gave her a taste of the independence she craved. Harold and Elise's connection began innocently enough. Their initial conversations revolved around art and Ridgewood's cultural scene. Harold expressed admiration for her aspirations, while Elise appreciated his support for the arts. However, beneath their polite exchanges, a spark began to ignite. A dangerous chemistry that neither could ignore. Harold started frequenting the art gallery where Elise worked, claiming an interest in local exhibitions. In truth, he sought every opportunity to see her. Elise, flattered by the attention of such an influential man, found herself drawn to the thrill of their encounters, even as she wrestled with doubts about their age difference and the potential consequences of their relationship. What began as lighthearted flirtation soon escalated into secret rendezvous. Late-night drives and private meetings at remote locations became the norm. Harold, desperate to fill the void in his life, became increasingly captivated by Elise's beauty and youth. She represented the vitality he had lost, and he clung to her presence like a lifeline. For Elise, the affair was an escape, a temporary rebellion against the monotony of Ridgewood and her father's strict expectations. As the months passed, Harold's feelings for Elise deepened into an unhealthy obsession. He began showering her with expensive gifts, jewelry, designer clothes, and even rare pieces of art. These gestures, intended to bind her closer to him, only served to highlight the imbalance in their relationship. Elise, though appreciative of the attention, grew uneasy with Harold's growing possessiveness. Meanwhile, Elise's life took a new turn when she met Daniel Porter, a charismatic artist who had recently moved to Ridgewood. Daniel, with his easygoing demeanor and shared passion for creativity, quickly became a source of comfort and inspiration for Elise. Their relationship started as a casual friendship but soon blossomed into something more. For Elise, Daniel offered the kind of connection she had always longed for, free of complications and expectations. Harold, however, soon became aware of Elise's involvement with Daniel. Consumed by jealousy, he began monitoring her movements. He would leave notes on her car, send incessant text messages, and even wait outside her apartment late at night. What had once felt thrilling to Elise now felt suffocating, and she began to fear Harold's intensity. Sheriff Richard Carter had always prided himself on his ability to read people, a skill honed over decades in law enforcement. Recently, he had noticed a change in his daughter. Elise, who had always been open and candid, was now secretive and withdrawn. She would disappear for hours without explanation and seemed nervous whenever her phone buzzed. Richard's instincts told him something was amiss, but Elise refused to confide in him. One evening, while driving home from the station, Richard spotted Harold Grant's car parked outside Elise's apartment. Though the sight initially seemed innocuous, after all, the judge was a respected member of the community. Something about the situation didn't sit right with the sheriff. Richard began quietly investigating Harold, pulling his phone records and tracking his recent activities. What he uncovered painted a troubling picture. Harold had been frequenting areas near Elise's workplace and residence with no apparent professional reason. Additionally, his financial records revealed several suspicious transactions, including a significant cash withdrawal shortly before the sheriff began his investigation. Richard's suspicions grew, but he had yet to confront either Harold or Elise. Elise's worst fears were realized one afternoon at the art gallery where she worked. Harold, his jealousy boiling over, stormed in while the gallery was empty. He had been tracking her movements and had seen her with Daniel at a local coffee shop earlier that day. His anger simmered just beneath the surface as he confronted her, his voice low but seething. "You think I don't know what's going on?" Harold hissed, stepping closer to Elise, his eyes blazing with betrayal. "You've been lying to me, sneaking around with that boy." Elise tried to calm him, insisting that Daniel was just a friend, but Harold was beyond reason. His possessiveness had consumed him entirely. He threatened to expose their affair, to tell her father everything. The thought of her father discovering the truth filled Elise with dread. She knew the fallout would be catastrophic, not just for her reputation but for Harold's as well. The confrontation left her shaken and more certain than ever that she needed to end their relationship. But ending things with Harold was easier said than done. He began showing up unannounced at her apartment, leaving threatening notes and making veiled promises that he would ruin her if she left him. Elise felt trapped, her fear of Harold's wrath growing with each passing day. Sheriff Richard Carter was becoming increasingly uneasy. His daughter's secretive behavior, coupled with his growing suspicions about Harold Grant, drove him to dig deeper. What he uncovered painted a disturbing picture. Harold had been making large, unexplained withdrawals from his bank account, frequenting Elise's workplace without any clear reason, and leaving cryptic messages in his phone records that hinted at an unhealthy obsession. One evening, Richard decided to follow Harold. He watched as the judge drove to a secluded area near Elise's apartment and waited in his car for over an hour. The sight confirmed what Richard had feared. Harold was stalking his daughter. Richard knew he needed to confront Harold, but he wanted to gather more evidence first. He began documenting Harold's movements and pulling more detailed records, hoping to build a case. However, before he could act, tragedy struck. On a cold February morning, a group of hunters discovered Sheriff Richard Carter's body in a remote area just outside Ridgewood. He had been shot execution style, the scene meticulously staged to leave few clues. The news of the sheriff's murder sent shockwaves through the community. Ridgewood, a town unaccustomed to such violence, was plunged into fear and uncertainty. Elise was devastated by her father's death, racked with guilt over her affair with Harold and fearful of what he might do next. She finally confessed everything to the investigators. Through tears, she revealed the full extent of her relationship with Harold, his growing obsession, and the threats he had made when he discovered her relationship with Daniel. Detectives immediately turned their attention to Harold Grant. The respected judge, once a symbol of integrity, was now the prime suspect in the murder of Ridgewood's beloved sheriff. Detective Mark Ellison, a veteran investigator with the State Bureau, was assigned to lead the case. As he dug into Harold's life, the pieces began to fall into place. Bank records showed that Harold had made a significant cash withdrawal days before the murder, enough money to suggest he may have hired someone to carry out the crime. Surveillance footage from a gas station near the crime scene placed Harold's car in the area on the night of the murder. Further scrutiny revealed a receipt for a hardware store purchase made 2 days before the murder. The items, gloves, rope, and a shovel, painted a picture of premeditation. While none of these findings directly implicated Harold in the crime, they provided a compelling circumstantial case against him. Despite the mounting evidence, Harold maintained his innocence, insisting he had no involvement in the sheriff's death. His composure began to falter, however, when investigators presented him with Elise's testimony. Her account of his obsessive behavior and veiled threats painted a damning portrait of a man driven to the brink by his unrequited desire. Detective Ellison knew they needed more to secure a conviction. He decided to confront Harold with the evidence in a high-stakes interrogation. Starting with the financial records and hardware store receipt, Ellison methodically laid out the case against Harold. As each piece of evidence was revealed, Harold's initial confidence gave way to unease. When Ellison mentioned Elise's testimony, Harold's composure cracked. The judge, who had spent years commanding respect in the courtroom, now sat pale and trembling. Finally, after hours of questioning, Harold began to talk first. His confession was disjointed, but gradually the full story emerged. Harold admitted to luring Sheriff Carter to the remote location under the pretense of discussing Elise. He had hoped to intimidate the sheriff into backing off, but the confrontation quickly escalated. In a moment of desperation, Harold pulled the trigger. I thought it was the only way," Harold muttered, his voice barely audible. "I couldn't lose Elise. Not to him. Not to anyone." The trial of Harold Grant became a media sensation, drawing attention far beyond Ridgewood. The story of a respected judge's fall from grace, his obsessive affair, and the murder of the town's beloved sheriff captivated the public. Every sordid detail of the case was laid bare in the courtroom, painting a chilling portrait of Harold's descent into darkness. Despite his defense team's efforts to argue that he had acted in a moment of passion, the jury was unconvinced. The evidence of premeditation, the cash withdrawal, the hardware store receipt, and the detailed planning was overwhelming. Harold was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the community of Ridgewood, the trial provided some closure, but the wounds left by the tragedy would take much longer to heal. For Elise, the aftermath of the trial was a time of painful introspection. Her affair with Harold, her father's murder, and the public scrutiny left her emotionally shattered. Unable to face the reminders of her past, she left Ridgewood shortly after the trial, seeking a fresh start in a place where no one knew her story. Though she hoped to rebuild her life, the scars of Harold's obsession lingered. Daniel, who had stood by her side throughout the ordeal, eventually drifted away. Their relationship couldn't withstand the weight of the trauma they had shared. Though he missed Elise, Daniel understood her need for distance and healing in Ridgewood. The story of Harold Grant and Sheriff Richard Carter became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the destructive power of unchecked obsession. The abandoned cabin where the sheriff's body was found became a symbol of the town's darkest chapter, avoided by locals and whispered about by those who remembered the tragedy. In the weeks following Harold Grant's sentencing, the community of Ridgewood struggled to make sense of what had happened. The town had lost not just its sheriff but also a respected judge, two figures who had been symbols of order and stability. The courthouse, once a place of justice, now carried the heavy stain of betrayal. Ridgewood residents grappled with mixed emotions. For some, Harold's conviction brought a sense of justice, but for others, the details of his obsessive affair and the circumstances surrounding the murder left lingering questions. How could a man like Harold, who had spent his life upholding the law, fall so far? And how had his obsession with Elise gone unnoticed for so long? The Carter family, once central to Ridgewood's law enforcement legacy, was now fractured. Elise's departure left a void in the hearts of those who knew her, but her decision to leave was widely understood. The weight of her father's murder and her involvement with Harold had cast a shadow too heavy to bear in a town that now knew her darkest secrets. Elise's move to a bustling city several hours from Ridgewood marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She changed her phone number, cut ties with all but a few close friends, and threw herself into her work at an art studio. She hoped that immersing herself in creativity would help her heal, but the memories of Ridgewood followed her like ghosts. Each time her phone buzzed unexpectedly, she felt a pang of anxiety, fearing Harold's shadow still loomed over her. Though Harold was now behind bars, the psychological toll of his obsession lingered. Elise found herself avoiding intimate relationships, unable to fully trust others. Even Daniel, who had been her source of strength during the investigation, became a painful reminder of all she had lost. With time, Elise began to rebuild. Her art reflected her journey, with themes of loss, resilience, and renewal woven into her pieces. Though she seldom spoke of Ridgewood, her past bled into her work in ways she couldn't always control. Her art gained recognition in local galleries, and she began to find a sense of purpose in expressing the emotions she had long kept buried. Back in Ridgewood, the cabin where Sheriff Richard Carter's body had been found became a silent monument to the tragedy. Locals avoided the area, and stories about the murder turned into whispered tales passed down to new generations. The cabin's broken windows and overgrown surroundings gave it an eerie presence, a physical reminder of the dark events that had once consumed the town. For the courthouse staff who had worked alongside Harold Grant, the scandal left an indelible mark. Judges and attorneys found themselves scrutinized more closely by the public, who now questioned the moral integrity of those in power. The courthouse implemented new policies aimed at improving transparency and accountability, but the shadow of Harold's actions was slow to fade. Over the years, the story of Harold Grant and Richard Carter became a cautionary tale in Ridgewood. Parents warned their children about the dangers of unchecked desire and the importance of setting boundaries in relationships. Teachers used the story as a lesson in the power dynamics that can distort human connections. Harold's name, once spoken with respect, became synonymous with betrayal and obsession. For many, the tragedy served as a chilling reminder of how darkness can fester in the most unexpected places. Harold's fall from grace was a stark example of how a seemingly honorable person could be consumed by personal demons, leading to catastrophic consequences. In prison, Harold Grant was no longer the commanding figure he had once been. Stripped of his title and influence, he spent his days in solitude, replaying the choices that had led to his downfall. His obsession with Elise had destroyed not only his life but also the lives of those around him. Yet, despite his outward remorse, Harold's thoughts often returned to what could have been. A twisted fantasy of a life he believed he could have shared with Elise if only circumstances had been different. Harold's case became a topic of study for psychologists and criminologists, who sought to understand the intersection of power, obsession, and moral decline. His meticulous planning of the murder, contrasted with the impulsive nature of his obsession, presented a unique profile that fascinated experts. Harold, however, refused all interview requests, choosing instead to live out his days in quiet infamy. For Ridgewood, moving forward meant finding ways to honor Sheriff Carter's memory. A plaque was erected at the town's police station, commemorating his years of service and dedication to the community. Annual events were held in his name to raise funds for youth programs and domestic violence awareness, causes close to his heart. Elise, though absent, remained in the thoughts of those who had known her. Friends who stayed in touch remarked on her resilience and strength, even as they mourned the loss of the vibrant young woman she had once been. Her story became a symbol of survival, a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable pain, it was possible to find a path forward. The tragedy of Harold Grant and Richard Carter left an indelible mark on Ridgewood. It was a story of how unchecked desire could lead to destruction, of how power could corrupt even the most respected individuals, and of how a community could come together to confront its darkest moments. For those who lived through it, the memory of the case served as a reminder that no one is immune to the complexities of human nature. Harold's obsession had revealed the fragility of the barriers between desire and control, morality, and madness. It was a lesson Ridgewood would never forget.